I honestly can't begin to say how weird the past few days have been for me so far. Especially after my friend David called me up about the Honkers incident last week. Everything that David said, the clowns, the slaughterhouse thing, the dead kids, etc., was just off, to say the least. This, of course, grew into unease for me when he started to laugh his ass off after I mentioned him about Bridgestone actually being Stonebridge Road. He must have laughed for at least a good 5 or 10 minutes or so before I finally had hung up the phone. Even during that time he was laughing, I tried asking him some more questions about what the hell had happened and what was going on, but of course I got no reply. Once I had hung up the phone, I just went back to bed, thinking that David had just been trying to play a prank on me or something, which in hindsight wasn't really that surprising. I mean, given the fact that I did that to him often when we were around each other. Hell, I even had a catchphrase to boot with it called, "It's no fun if I just tell you." Needless to say, though, it didn't really bother me too much. That is until I didn't hear from David for the next 3 days. He didn't call me, he didn't text me, he didn't do anything. Hell, he didn't even show up at our local coffee shop that we frequently visited to pick up on some hot girls. He was just quiet. Which is certainly not like David to act like that. As you would have expected, I got rather concerned about him and decided to drive over to his apartment about 6 miles away from my small home to see if he was alright, or at the very least, still alive. Parking my old Honda Civic in the parking lot in the apartment complex, I trudged my way to at least 5 flights of stairs to get myself to the long concrete hallway that held his door number. I still to this very day have no idea or clue why he even decided to rent an apartment this high up. It must have been a killer to get his furniture all the way up there. Making my way towards his door, I quickly began knocking on it, nearly pounding it in the process. There wasn't an answer for at least a good minute or two, and I was about to knock again when the sound of bare feet hitting the linoleum floor indicated that somebody was coming to the door. I stepped back from it and watched as the sound of locks unhinging and chains began to fill my ears. The door then opened up slowly, and I finally got a look at my friend, and to say that he didn't look good was an understatement. He was dressed in nothing more than a pair of boxer briefs and a light blue bathrobe that reached his calf muscles. His hair was all mangled up and knotted, his face was in the process of growing a mustache and beard, and his eyes were puffy and red as if he had been crying earlier. I didn't really say anything to at least a few seconds, but instead just reached out my hand to give him one of my strong handshakes that I tend to give. David looked at my hand and backed up at me, his face showing a look of absolute defeat and soullessness. Basically, he just didn't really seem to give much of a shit anymore, and judging by how he looked, it was kind of obvious. Hi, David, I said, trying to start up a conversation. Hey, Peter, David muttered. I just came over to see if you were alright. You haven't been answering your phone for at least a couple of days now. I know. The silence returned for a few seconds before David walked back into his apartment and gestured me to follow him, to which I did. As I entered into his apartment, I was immediately hit with a rather pungent odor that filled up my nostrils in a rather dramatic way. The scent wasn't exactly putrid, but at the same time it was really disgusting. The smell was a mixture of unwashed clothing, rotting food, clogged toilets, followed by a sprinkling of cat piss. This was even more revolting to me, given the fact that David didn't even own a cat. Covering my nose with my shirt, I quickly shut the door to the apartment and made my way over towards the living room where David was at. I took a better look at the apartment and quickly found the sources for at least half of the smells that had pretty much was ranked in the room. The living room was dirty as all hell. There were boxes of pizza scattered all over the place, a couple of pieces even being in there, molding like crazy. The couch was covered in a bunch of unknown stains, discarded clothing, and the floor itself was littered with a lot of trash. Mostly from Chinese boxes, but still. David, of course, saw my reaction and spoke. Yeah, I know it smells like shit in here, but after what's going what I went through, I just gave up giving a shit, you know. I took a seat in one of the chairs that had thankfully been covered up by a blanket, thus keeping the unnecessary food and junk from ruining it. Once I had removed the blanket and placed it on the floor and sat down on the clean couch, I turned towards David and began asking him a few questions. Dude, what the hell happened to you? David didn't really respond, but more or less answered my question with him lifting up his arms to reveal his sweat and food-covered body, not to mention the horrid body odor as well. I, of course, gagged and accepted his answer by gesturing for him to fucking close his arms. I know that wasn't the answer that you were looking for, but hey. At least it was an answer, David said, smirking a bit. Look, I get it, you're in bad shape, but still, why are you like this? What the hell happened to you for you to get like this? I asked him. David's smirk had then fell nearly instantly as I asked him that. Then his smirk reappeared. It's no fun if I just tell you, David said in a mocking tone. I simply rolled my eyes a bit at this. Sure, it was a little bit clever, but at the same time, it wasn't very appropriate for the issue at hand. My friend was obviously bothered by something, and I wanted to know what it was. Cut the bullshit, David, I began. You've been stuck in the house for days, you don't take any calls, and you look like you're about to fucking die. You already know. I already told you when I called you up that night, David said flatly. What the hell are you even going on about? That honker's place? Dude, I know for a fact that was just a prank that you pulled on me. And if you think I'm gonna... It wasn't a fucking prank, Peter! David snapped. The sentence caused me to immediately go silent. That was the first time in a long time that I had heard David snap like that before. Everything that I said in that fucking car was true. The clowns, the dead kids, every little fucking thing that I actually saw there. It happened, Peter! It fucking happened! Peter's eyes began to water as he started to retell the events that had happened to him back at the restaurant. I followed your directions to the T, Peter. Well, I guess not exactly, but still. I drove down to that patch of cornfields for who the fuck knows how long, where I finally found that restaurant. The place was new and clean. It was all circus related with seals, circus clowns, whatever the fuck else. Not to mention the employees that looked like clowns, fun size, and a bunch of other shit. I ordered that big top burger and ate most of it. The cook nearly fucking killed me after I bit down a shard of metal and called him out for it. I then ran out of that building and I saw a large refrigerated truck that held children. Fucking children, goddammit! David's voice began to crack as tears started to flow down his eyes at a massive pace. I left there. I tried calling the police, but they didn't listen to me. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is I wound up eating children. Young, innocent children that were taken away from their families by these fucked up ground of clowns for their meat. I ate them. I ate those poor children and I did nothing to help them. Even when that door is open, I could have done something. But I didn't. David had already slumped back down to his sofa at that point, practically bawling his eyes out in the process. I honestly didn't know what to do at that point. I mean, it just didn't really register in my head all that had just happened to him. However, my next choice of words really did nothing to help ease the tension in the room. Look, David, I began. I want to believe you, but that kind of thing just doesn't happen. Hell, if that was true, why didn't you at least save some kind of evidence or something like that? Obviously, my statement really did nothing to help. And if anything, I was not only a dumbass for saying it, but a real asshole as well. David then turned to me with a look of pure, unadulterated rage. His face was now red, with a mixture of anger and remorse. Get out! He spat. Excuse me? I said, get the fuck out of my goddamn house! David screamed. I quickly did as I was told and practically ran out of the front door at a quick speed as David followed me out, yelling various obscenities at me as he did. When I finally exited out of the apartment, David took one last look at me and threw a notepad at me. "You don't believe me? Fine! Go and see it for yourself and then call me and tell me that I'm wrong!" With that, David slammed the door shut. I simply stayed in my place for the time being before I quickly went and retrieved the notepad that had been thrown at me. I opened it up and saw that one of the pages contained the directions that I had given to David, minus the Bridgestone error, to bring him to the topless girls' restaurant, Hooters. Well, Honkers, honestly. Taking one last look at the door, I made my way back to the car and got in. I drove a few miles away from the apartment complex, making my way back home, still thinking about everything that David had said to me back at the apartment. I took a look at the directions that was written on that piece of paper, and with a sigh, I started the U-turn at the next stop to make my way over where the directions took me at. I drove for roughly 20 minutes or so, keeping my eyes on the road and trying to fish out any of the road signs that may have had the name Bridgestone Road on it. Well, after a bit of luck, I managed to find the road, and with that, I turned on my blinker and made my way back to it. I'm not really too sure how long it actually took me to get to that place. If anything, I was a lot more mesmerized by the length of corn roads that greeted me as I drove. At this point, I nearly decided to just give up looking for the place. I was pretty damn tired, and the place itself seemed to be just nothing else more than an abandoned town. That is, until I wound up finding a large, fully lit Honkers sign about a mile or so away from where I was driving at. Well, David was right about one thing. And now that I have seen the sign, there was no way in hell I was going to miss out seeing what had caused my friends so much anguish. Not only that, but I honestly wanted to try and get as many answers as possible to maybe clear up any kind of issues that may have been the case. About a few minutes passed, I finally made my way to the restaurant itself. Just to my surprise, it was exactly as David had described it. It was a new-looking McDonald's-like building, lying gargoyles sat at the front of the door, and the tent-like door as well complemented the entire circus theme. Parking my car in one of the empty parking spaces, I got out of the driver's side door and walked out, but not before I grabbed my small handgun that I carried in cases of emergencies. The air was already starting to grow cold as a heavy breeze of air caused me to stop dead in my tracks and shiver. I should have brought a jacket with me. I took another look at the parking lot and noticed that it was rather empty to say the least. Well, that's not entirely true. There was this old beat-up car that sat in the parking spots near my car. I walked over to inspect it and noticed that it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Or at least that's what it seemed like to me. Its entire thing was completely rusted and broken down in many different ways. I was honestly surprised that it hadn't been towed out of the restaurant yet. I was going to inspect the car a bit more, but another cold blast of air pretty much deterred me away from it. I quickly made my way towards the double doors and walked in, wanting to get out of the cold as quickly as possible. The heated building was very much welcome to me as goosebumps covered the top layer of my uncovered arms. "Honk honk! Welcome to Honkers!" A sudden chorus of voices that came from the mouths of the employees in the restaurants caused me to jump and nearly fall on my ass. Fucking hell, that scared the crap out of me. I turned towards where the greeting had came from and noticed a bunch of employees dressed up in slacks, painted faces, and red nose, as well as a yellow shirt and white hats with a large H embroidered onto the top of it. They were all staring at me. Obviously, I was a bit weirded out by this, but decided that the best course of action was to go and ask one of the cashiers a few questions. Going up towards the counter, I was met with a young teenage Caucasian man with a small beard and blue eyes. Well, he looked up at me with a wide grin on his face. "It's a great night for the circus," the teen began. "Would you like to try our Big Top Burger? We're having a special." I just stood there, a bit dumbfounded a little bit, before quickly shaking my head a bit and asking, "Actually, I'm not really here to eat. I'm here to ask a couple of questions, if you don't mind," I asked him. Large smile that was plastered on the teen's face started to fade a bit. Not by much, but it was still relatively noticeable. This confused me a bit, but I decided to start asking the questions that I had had. "So, who are you guys anyway, and where did this restaurant come from? I'd like to know a little bit about it," I asked. The employee, ringleader was his name, or at least that's what it said on his name tag, didn't really say anything, but instead just repeated the same phrase again. "It's a great night for the circus. Would you like to try our Big Top Burger? We're having a special." This, however, was weird. I honestly didn't think that he didn't hear me, and I was rather insulted over the fact that the kid just ignored me. So I asked again, and again he replied with the same Big Top Burger thing again. What the fuck was this kid's problem? I just asked him a question and this kid had the audacity just to ignore me? I would have snapped at him, but I decided to play it cool a little bit and just ask one last time. Kid, I asked you a question. Where are you guys from? I'm just trying to get some answers here." This time, instead of asking about the Big Top Burger, the employee just frowned and looked down at his shoes. I was about to ask him what was wrong until the boisterous howl that came from the kitchen blasted into the dining room with brute force. "Either order something or get the fuck out!" The tone of voice nearly caused me to shit my pants. No joke either. I quickly turned towards the cashier and quickly apologized. He then regained his stupid grin on his face and asked me for the 4th or 5th fucking time about the goddamn Big Top Burger. Wanting nothing else more than to have this teen shut the fuck up, I took a look at the menu and, seeing as how there really wasn't a whole lot to be offered, decided to get the Ring of Fire chicken sandwich. "Good choice, sir," the boisterous teen said. Would you like a drink with it?" "I'll have a Dr. Pepper with that, please. Large," I answered. "Would you like funny fries, hoop rings, or a silly salad?" the teen asked. Funny fries, I guess. Large, please," I said. "Would you like me to silly size that for you today? It's only $1 extra." "I think I'll pass on that one." Ringmaster then punched a few buttons on the cash register and then rang up my price. "That'll be $4.26, please," the teen said as he opened up the register. I took out a $10 bill from my back pocket and handed it to him and told the kid just to keep the change. I then made my way towards one of the tables that lie in the area near the booths. I made sure to check to make sure that it was closest towards the counter to see if anything remotely suspicious happened there. Well, that really didn't happen, but what did happen was the cook, I presume, spouting out and screaming randomly as he was preparing my food. I'd rather not mention what the cook really said, as it was a rather bit too vulgar and kind of fucked up, but I do recall a large splash of something and the cook in the back letting out a loud "fuck" as he did so. Soon enough, after some mumbling from the cook, the sound of food being wrapped and fries being placed into a container could be heard, before a bag was placed outside of the window with the cook saying, "Order up!" I immediately walked up towards the counter and looked into the bag while Ringleader filled up my cup with the soda I had ordered. Everything was as expected. It was pretty normal from what I saw. The chicken sandwich wasn't exactly that big, but it did have a very heavy red tinted color. I guess that was either from the spices or it was just the coloring to make it seem as if it was fiery hot, I guess. The fries themselves looked about as average as best. They kind of reminded me of Burger King fries, which really aren't that good. And at the bottom of the bag was a pair of sad-looking ketchup packets that stared up at me. I knew for a fact that 2 ketchup packets wouldn't have been enough to coat any of my fries, so I was about to ask the employee for some extra ketchup. However, before I even had the chance to say anything, the cook popped his head out of the window that the food was placed at and glared at me with a psychotic frown on his face. His entire face was coated in white makeup and other face paints that actually made him look like a frickin' clown. Hell, I could even see part of his clown costume as well. However, that wasn't the freakiest part about him. His eyes were wide and bloodshot as he shot me a flash of his ungroomed and yellow teeth, as if to look threatening in some kind of way. "No extra fucking ketchup, you fucking cunt!" The cook spat out as spittle flew all over the place. I was rather disgusted by the tone of voice he was giving me, but at the same time, I also wasn't really in the mood to deal with anyone's bullshit today. "Listen, you fat clown fuck," I began. "I'm not in the mood for your shit today. All I was going to ask for was some extra fucking ketchup. You didn't need to yell at me like that. I'm not some fucking kid, you little cunt. There was silence in the room, and the clown figure looked as he was about to fucking kill someone. That's how pissed off he was. He simply put his head back into the window and gestured for me to go and sit down somewhere, following that with him flipping me the bird. To which I flipped him off as well and went to sit down with my food. I took out the sandwich and took a bite out of it. It wasn't really that bad, especially for it being one of those processed chicken pucks, as I call them. The spice was actually nice too. It wasn't too hot, but it did tingle my tongue with each bite I took. I continued to focus eating my meal and was about done with it, and just kind of more or less looked around everywhere. The employees were still looking at me, which was really unnerving. I took one final bite of my sandwich and I felt something rubbery in my mouth. It was extremely disgusting to say the least, and it was really hard to chew. I spat out the morsel of food that was in my mouth and took a look at what had been in there. What I saw disgusted yet horrified me at the same time. A finger. A severed human finger. Now, I didn't immediately freak out right then and there, but a question did pop up into my mind. How in the living hell did a child's finger manage to get its way into my freaking chicken sandwich? More importantly, a processed chicken sandwich. How the hell was that even possible? Once I thought that through, I did the only logical thing that I could do. I puked. Well, more projectile vomited all over the place. It didn't really last that long, but when it finally did end, some of the workers immediately came in with a mop and bucket and began to clean up some of the vomit. I was about as livid could be, and I didn't hesitate to make my voice heard. Hey, you fucking asshole! Yeah, you, the fat clown fuck! You got a lot of goddamn nerve to serve me a finger in my food, much less a child's finger, you sick fuck! Everyone grew quiet, not even making a sound. You're all fucked up, you know that, right? I'm gonna make sure of it that you bastards serve life in prison for this shit, you pedo motherfuckers! I stood there, flashing the severed finger that was still in the wrapper at the employees, who at this point already had started covering their ears, making a large round O shape out of their mouths and shaking their heads from side to side furiously. Then a loud bang was heard from the door that led into the kitchen area. The force of the kick was enough to send the door literally falling down to the ground with a loud plop that echoed throughout the restaurant. I looked at the doorway and saw the tall, lengthy, and bulky ogre of a man that was a cook. My mouth dropped to the ground as I saw how large the man really was. His entire body was dressed in a full clown suit, along with an apron around of it, splattered in great masses of blood, I think. And his shoes honked as he took a step. However, the sound of it was like a horn filled with jelly. Really wet sounding and disgusting. The head of the beast, which I called him, was a lot smaller in comparison to his body, and was boiling with rage. He then glared at me and started making his way towards me. I quickly ran as fast as I could to the exit. However, before I could even make my way out of the restaurant and back to the safety of my car, I slipped into a grease pile that hadn't been there when I first walked in. I landed on my back and cried out in pain. I tried getting up, but before I could even try, I found myself being dragged by the feet by the large clown. I tried to escape his grasp, but nearly found it impossible due to the excess grease that was on my hands and body, and not to mention the fact of the matter that there was a heavy grip from the clown thing. You're not going anywhere! The clown cook screamed out. That other guy may have gotten away, but I'll be damned if you escape too. The cook continued to drag me down to the kitchen. I screamed and begged for one of the employees to help me, but nothing was done. All of them did was just continue to shake their heads violently. Soon enough, the cook had me in his kitchen. It wasn't very big. In fact, it was rather small for a fast food kitchen. The entire room itself, however, was a mess with large splatters of what I assumed to be ketchup and ground up meat that was near the sink area. The cook then let go of my foot and pulled out one of the sharpest butcher knives I had ever seen in my life. The clown cook just looked at me and started laughing in hysterics, and then jumped on top of me and started to lower the knife down to where my heart was. I was surprised that the excess weight that he had didn't crush the hell out of me. Needless to say, I was freaking the fuck out. I grabbed his hand and held the knife and tried as hard as I could to keep it from piercing my chest. Then with my free hand, I immediately pulled out my gun that I had in my pocket and aimed it at the clown's head. I was about to pull the trigger on the fat fuck, but he quickly grabbed my other arm with his other hand and held it down tightly. Not wanting to die from this bastard, I did everything that I could to position the gun as close to this clown as I could. The clown took a look at it and noticed that it was right near where his head was going to be at. I smirked at him as he dropped the knife. "Order up, motherfucker," I said as I finally pulled the trigger. A loud bang echoed throughout the restaurant as the clown man looked down at me with widened eyes. Blood and brains splattered all over the place. He immediately collapsed on top of me, nearly smothering me in the process. But thanks to a couple of kitchen equipment, I was able to break free. Getting up from the spot, I felt a few sharp pains coming from different parts of my body, which was rather intense. However, I knew I needed to look a lot further in this godforsaken restaurant to really find out what the truth was. So far, David had already been completely and utterly correct about everything. There was just one last thing I needed to see. Not far from the grill was a large freezer that took up most of the kitchen space. I quickly opened it up and looked inside of it. Children. Children of various sizes, shapes, and colors, all stacked on top of each other. A layer of frost and ice layered over their naked bodies. I checked around the freezer to see if any of them were still alive, or at least barely, but I could find none. They were all dead. I don't really recall too much after that. I guess I might have blacked out or snapped or something, because when I finally did wake up, I was standing in the middle of the dining room in the restaurant, covered in a copious amount of blood and chunks of gore. The dining room was as saturated with the crimson redness as I was, and the bodies of the employees laid lifeless on the floor. Fresh bullet, knife, or other unidentifiable wounds all covering their bodies from head to toe. I went into the kitchen area and saw what remained of the cook. Nothing. His body was torn open, his head decapitated from his body and stuck into the sink, his arms and legs severed like so, and placed on top of the hot flat iron grill, cooking away, sending a repulsive stench. I guess when you mix rage and adrenaline together, you get a rather fucked up kind of monster. Not like it mattered to me, though. The fuckers deserved it for all the shit they put those kids through. Not to mention that, they also deserved it because of what they put me and David through. I quickly exited the building and ran to the back. There, I found a couple of gas cans near a generator. As you would have expected, I doused the place in as much gasoline as I could muster, as well as spitting and even pissing on a few of the bodies themselves, especially the cook. And with one single match that I found in the kitchen, I lit that fucker on fire. I didn't stay too long, but I did watch as the place ignited. It was an absolutely beautiful sight to see justice finally be deserved. I would have stayed and enjoyed the rest of the scene, but I knew that the cops would wind up showing up soon, and I did not want to get arrested, so I quickly left. The place burned to the ground rather quickly. Hell, it even exploded a bit and collapsed in on itself after I drove about a couple of miles away from the place. It felt good. It truly felt so amazing to see those fuckers get what they deserve. I then picked up my cell phone and dialed David's number. It rang for some time and then it finally went to his voicemail box. I was about to leave him a message, but then a message came up saying that his mailbox was full and that I couldn't leave a message for him. So I wound up driving back all the way back to my house without another word being said. I slept well that night. The Following morning, I made sure to get up early so that I could go over to David's and tell him about the amazing news, followed by a much-needed apology for not believing him in the beginning. When I finally got to his apartment complex, I made my way over to the long flights of stairs and to his apartment door. I hastily knocked on it, but didn't get a reply for a good minute or so. So I knocked on the door again, and this time, thank God, David finally answered. He was still dressed in his undergarments and robe, but his face told a different story. He had a smile plastered on his face for some reason. I would have asked him what was up, but instead he just grabbed my arm and pulled me into the apartment building without a word being said. He then took me into the living room, and with the giddiness usually reserved for younger children, he pulled out a newspaper and plopped it down right in front of me. I picked it up, and my eyes widened a bit at the front page news. It read, "Unknown restaurant burned to the ground. In freak accident." This is what the paper said. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, police and firefighters were contacted by a local corn farmer located on Bridgestone Road, letting said officers know about a fire that was raging about a few miles away from the farm. Firefighters were immediately sent to investigate and put out the flames, as well as police officers as well. What was discovered after the blaze had finally been extinguished was what looked to be a fast food restaurant of some sort. A few sources have claimed that up and down that this restaurant was named Honkers, not to be confused with the Honkers located some time back down the road or so, and that had been open for quite some time in the area. Upon further investigation, the charred remains of at least 10 adults and at least 50 or 60 children had been found in the rubble. Police are still looking into the case to determine the cause of death that had been inflicted on the employees and children. Until then, though, the police investigation will still continue on forward, looking for suspects that may have been involved with this. I was about to open the page up to a second article, until David took the paper out of my hand and then smiled at me repeatedly. He then looked at me again with a wide grin on his face and said, "You did it, didn't you?" He asked me in a joyful kind of manner. "Yeah. I burned that fucking place to the ground. I honestly can't say how sorry, man. I'm sorry, man. I should have..." David held out his hand and said, "Dude, it's fine. After you sitting there and doing all that, fucking hell, man, I should be giving you a freaking medal because of that." I smiled and thanked him. He then told me that he was going to clean up his place and himself, and that he wanted to thank me again for everything that I did. I accepted it and told him that it was just the right thing to do. So after we shook hands and planned to go to the bar next week to see if we could hook up with a couple of extra girls, I was about to leave. And then he stopped and asked me one last question. "You know, what exactly did you do to the chef and employees anyway?" he asked. I smirked and took in a small little breath before finally saying my catchphrase. "Well, it's no fun if I just tell you."